So the utilities have sued the government, saying, you promised to take it, we're having to pay to keep it on site, build dry casks or whatever. And so already there have been court decisions for somewhere between $2 and $3 B as in boy billion paid out of the general treasury of the U.S., not out of the nuclear waste fund, because any electricity generated by a nuclear reactor up until just a few months ago paid a very small tax to go into the nuclear waste fund, which was designed to give us the money to deal with the waste. But because the government's not been able to satisfy their obligation, there's been a ruling recently that said they're no longer going to collect any more money for the nuclear waste fund. So again, we the taxpayer are left holding the bag. So to summarize the price part of things, if you're an owner of a nuclear facility, it's a pretty good deal, isn't it? You get somebody else to take the risk of starting it. If it fails, you're not out anything, or out very little. You get somebody else to pay your liability insurance so that you're covered on that if there's an accident. And then the government takes the waste at the end. Meanwhile, while you operate it, you can make $1 million or more a day on a reactor. So this is what we're faced with. Where's the free market when we need it, I say? You know, if this is a mature industry, it's not some idea that's just beginning. This has been going on since 1957. If it's as good as the industry says it is, why isn't Wall Street rushing to invest in it? Why aren't the insurance companies happy to insure it? And why do we have so many troubles? Now, pollution. At every step of the nuclear chain, there's pollution. Starting with uranium mining, where a great deal of radon gas is given off, and the Navajo miners who did so much of this work, especially during the time of the Manhattan Project, suffered great lung cancer and health problems. And to this day, there are huge mounds of mine tailings in these communities. And the wind, the water, and the air distribute them around. It's a very damaging situation. Uranium has to be refined, and that too creates pollution. The town of White Mesa in Utah suffered great pollution from a refinement facility. And then we need to enrich uranium. This is what all the hubbub in Iran is about, the aluminum tubes and centrifuges. The building that was built in Oak Ridge for uranium enrichment, at the time it was built, was the biggest building ever built on the face of the earth. And with uranium enrichment, what we're doing is uranium ore has a mixture of isotopes. And there's only one that we're after for either nuclear power, fuel rods, or nuclear weapons. And that's uranium-235. Uranium-235 is 0.7% of uranium ore. So if you have 100 pounds of uranium ore, and you separate out the U-235, you're left with 99.3 pounds of depleted uranium. So this is a huge pollution problem. And just 0.7 pounds of the uranium-235, which is what you're after. Fuel fabrication, there have been near accidents. And then just the use of the fuel. And this is what's going on less than 50 miles away from here at Palisades, where the fission reaction is going on. It's making all sorts of hundreds of new man-made radiological elements. And they're a normal, under normal operating circumstances, nuclear reactors regularly emit gases, radioactive gases. They also have leaky pipes. This has been a problem at Palisades. Kevin mentioned Indian Point, the reactor that's operating 35 miles from the center of downtown New York City, where I live now. That has had a terrible problem with leaking pipes. At Vermont Yankee, I think part of the reason why there was so much public uproar about that reactor is that the company lied about there being any pipes. They said, there are no pipes. There's nothing leaking. Well, there are pipes, and they were leaking. People don't like to be lied to. And then, of course, we have accidents. The major ones are 3 Mile Island in this country in 1979, 1986, Chernobyl in then Russia, now Ukraine, and of course Fukushima. So that's part of the pollution, and this pollution has health consequences. But it's very complicated to study this science. You really can't do a double-blind controlled study because it's not morally acceptable to expose people, even in the name of science, to radioactivity. And it's hard to control for other factors. We live in a world where it's not just radioactivity that you're getting, but it's particulate matter, it's pesticides, it's many other elements in this environment that we live in. And the effects aren't conclusive. If you get thyroid cancer, there's not some little sign that says made in Palisades. It might be from something else, but it could be from Palisades. And I should just mention that the health effects go far beyond just cancer. There are problems with lungs, eyes, heart, circulatory systems, and genetic materials. So there's really a broad range of effects, and they can be intergenerational. If it's a recessive gene that's damaged, that damage may not show for several generations. But there are vested interests that, in my opinion, have hijacked science, that we really aren't doing the good studies. In Chernobyl, somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 workers were mobilized to deal with that catastrophe. But somehow, most of those health records don't exist anymore. So we really can't follow what did happen. We have stories from Fukushima now about lack of honesty, lack of transparency, lack of accurate information. We rely on TEPCO, the company who's liable in this case. We're depending on them for the information on what was released. So we really have our hands tied. In 3 Mile Island, in fact, the meters that measured radioactivity went off scale. So we didn't have a measurement about how much was released in 3 Mile Island. So they assumed that there was no core meltdown, and they estimated what was released. Now, somewhat recently, a few years ago, there was a class action suit about 3 Mile Island, people claiming that they've been damaged. The stories you hear are just the same description of the stories from Chernobyl, the metallic taste in the mouth, the father and son who were inside but apparently were sunburned, or something had burned their skin. But the class action suit was thrown out. Now what happened is, after 3 Mile Island cooled down enough so that they could open it, they found out that, guess what, there was a partial core meltdown. But they never bothered to go back and recalculate what would the expected releases be. So this court case was thrown out because they said the official word is this tiny amount was released. There's no way that could cause all these things you're claiming, so toodaloo.